or the nonprofit sector going.
All of the gains in automation.
And then like every group puts a
All you
rep
have to do is
to this
have
larger
everyone be an
body.
owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everybody. If you grow just one thing, it may not
Because
grow
there
as
actually
well
is
as
something
if you
like
grow
that for the
with
neighborhood
another
associations,
thing. A good example of
called the
that is
Council
the
of
three
Neighborhood
sister plan.
Associations.
Oh, that's cool.
So they don't do any big stuff, but I think that they at least act as a body for
$100 million
information sharing.
that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they breach contract. Is that
But they
a
are
big
like a
number?
pseudo government
Or is $2 billion a bigger number?
of the busybodies.
I don't know, Zach.
It's a tough one. I know.
Really hard.
Well, it's
And
mostly an older
maybe
group of
comparing
the
numbers is not Jeremy Strong's.
the older
Go kill a
cadre of
I
dissidents
don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
of my
It's a
of my
ghost,
father's
dude.
generation,
Mm-hmm.
and they're pretty much like the establishment now, or they have been since 2013.
So welcome back, everybody, to Bread Theory. I'm your host, Zach, and joining me, as usual on Tuesdays, is Dan Platt of the Albany Greens. How you doing tonight, Dan?
Oh, I'm good. I'm fresh off of a candidate forum where I am running for library trustee with 11 other people. It's quite a wide field. So
Sounds like a packed
I'm
field, yeah.
not quite optimistic, actually, but I think everyone has an equal chance since we're pretty much just trying to bring in everyone we know to vote for us. You know, it's not like there's only literally 2 weeks until that vote. So not a heavy campaigning.
Not a long campaign slog.
That's sort of why I'm doing it. So I'm not doing a long campaign slog or like worrying about it, or I'm worrying about it, but only until like for the last month and a half. And hopefully my anxieties go away, at least after Stein petitioning's over. I can't tell if I'm worried about whether or not we'll have enough, or whether or not we're doing enough. But we're doing what we're doing. Like tomorrow, I think it's a statewide Muslims rally in New York for Gaza.
Yeah?
That should be a sizable crowd. Peter was making.
That's cool.
Need more than a few people to cover it to get signatures.
Do you have any local universities who have been doing encampments?
No, there was a small protest or rally on SUNY Albany, but it was like 20 people. It wasn't enough.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough to start.
Yeah.
But there are lots of lawns that are perfect for it, but there are not, because of the way the campus is set up, they're kind of ringing the campus. They're not in the campus. So there's no like centrally, because the central, it's a big plinth. And on Thursday, I went around the plinth to get signatures, and I was actually disappointed. I only got 8.
Really?
I got a lot less than I thought. I mean, it's finals week.
Oh, true.
Or at least the end of classes were today. So, but I knew like that's why I went last week, because like no point going this week. But I got some good I got some hits. I call them hits. You know, when I was going through the first like 20 people, but then the next 30 people were all passes. Yeah. So then I kind of get morale drops, and I'm like,
yeah.
And there's basically no one else. So I mean, I could like ring and walk around the whole campus, but then I'm only encountering like a few people sitting down at a time. And yeah, so there's just like I just kind of became a bust, but eight's more than none, and I didn't spend more than an hour. And but then I went to a climate change march, very somber affair. It's kind of like, you know, funeral procession. Yikes. Of about 30 older people with time on their hands. And but they basically go to the 3 main banks in downtown. That's Chase, Bank of America, and then TD Bank, which, you know, have a combined $1 trillion in fossil fuel investments. So it's an investment campaign, but it's no. I mean, Extinction Rebellion should be a divestment campaign, and it kind of there was a year where, you know, Extinction Rebellion was a thing, but now it's like it doesn't seem like it's a thing.
Yeah, it just kind of evaporated. Sad to see.
Because like always, these orgs or that start or movements that start, they mobilize, but they don't organize
Right.
because they're not set up to be organizations that last. If they are, like the attrition rate is like it's not sustainable because they don't have a funding source or they don't get anyone who's mobilized. I mean, maybe everyone who's mobilized will maybe donate something, but they can't be members. I mean, that's part of why the library is alluring to me because it has a $7 million budget
Sure.
and or more,
Yeah.
and like that's money you can do shit with, even though a lot of it's tied up with facilities and staff and all that because
Sure.
it is a unionized staff.
Mm-hmm.
But that it's more meaningful. It also means that people are available. There is a staff that can do the programming. Though there's kind of a scarcity, so it's like we can only do a lot of programming, but only Saturdays and not Sundays. But that's the choice is that we concentrate the staffing on Saturday so we can maximize the amount of reading time and stuff for families on Saturdays. So anyway, let's bring up that playlist.
Definitely.
I think I've added some Library of Thing videos, which are short. But there's also the other stuff that we've still got left over that I put in there.
All right. I'll bring that up right now.
No particular theme this time because the weeks are just buzzing by now, thankfully.
Yeah. Getting near the end of the school year for me. But then the start of my grad school year. So, end of one, beginning of the next. All right, so this one is why vertical farms worldwide are failing.
Now, it's obviously a hyperbolic title, but the bubble is bursted on vertical farm investment because it's all of that kind of venture capital, which has to go somewhere, and it goes to whoever has the cool idea, solar roads, vertical farms. Oh
man, that's solar roads.
Stuff of the future. The future. We got to invest in the future.
That was the most inane discussion ever.
So
solar roads came out.
So let's learn about the state of the vertical farm industry.
Yeah,
it's a good I think it's a pretty good breakdown.
Right off the bat, I got to say this is not my favorite way of growing food. It is super energy intensive, and it basically has to be run like a microchip. Like this is a totally artificial biome. There are no predator bugs, so if you do get an infestation, you're kind of doomed because they don't want to use any sort of pesticide or herbicide in these facilities. They're marketing it as organic usually. So like people have to go through bleach baths in order to get into the facility. Like that's the level of biosecurity that you have to employ. And then there's just a ton of electrical lights that all burn out eventually, even if you're using the most energy efficient LEDs.
What if it's all coming from solar power?
I mean, that definitely helps, but like it's still using a lot more materials than just putting plants in the sun.
Can you tell I've been on the solar punk pages where like you have posters sharing vertical farm stuff, and I'm like,
oh yeah, it's just like those skies.
It's a lot of like, and they're like, oh, but it's only using all the right kind of light, so it's even less. It's not a lot of energy at all.
That's not wrong, and LEDs do last quite a long time, but everything comes to an end, and it's just it is still making the mistake of viewing farming as just another industry. It's input in one side, output on the other side.
Another side, yeah.
There's no ecology factored in.
We call that rationalization.
Yeah.
Rationalization is the Marxist term, or whatever. Yeah. Critical theory.
So I like the idea of vertical farming. I think it can be done better in greenhouses with functioning, as close to an actual functioning ecosystem as possible. And also with other things like, merging it with aquaponics. So growing fish using the waste of the fish, making a recirculating system. So I think there's better ways of doing it.
Yeah, let's have a bunch of Earth 2s.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, but if you want to have local produce growing in the wintertime in northern climates, that's probably a pretty good way to do it, I would say. But yeah, anyway, let's watch the video.
Vertical farm files for bankruptcy.
Vertical farm startup files for Chapter 11.
Bankruptcy.
A way of
What are these,
feeding
private
an
colleges?
ever-increasing world population. And do it all with less water, and by stacking vertically, grow more produce on less acreage. It all sounds like a brilliant idea. And yet fast forward to 2024, and vertical farm after vertical farm is failing and going bankrupt. So what happened? This sounds like such a good idea on paper, but clearly something's not working. So we need to get to the bottom of what exactly is going on, because this one surprised me. And there's actually a little bit more to the story than I realized. So stick around till the end. I'm Ricky, and this is 2-Bit Da Vinci.
Gotta watch all of it.
2-Bit Da Vinci, huh?
This video is
Da
sponsored
Vinci.
by Ground News. Over $2 billion were invested in vertical farms in 2022, with hundreds of startups and vertical farms promising to make farming possible in
I
large
really
urban
wish those
hubs.
billions went into agroforestry,
Right?
because you don't really need you don't need to test and experiment. It just
Right.
works.
You don't need
Just
a lot
fund
of
doing more of it.
science and stuff that you bring into it. It's
But it's also not it's not investment for the sake of investment.
right. There's also, it's not as production oriented like with like food forests and that sort of a thing. You have a lot of micro seasons and a lot of different ways that you need to harvest stuff, so it's not as easy to automate by any means. It takes a lot more labor.
And
to do
that's where
things
we get into. I
ecologically.
mean, I think he covers this, which is I like this video. He kind of
Cool.
covers a little bit of all these points. But yeah, I mean, the whole point is that this is supposed to integrate food into tech,
Yeah,
making food growing a technology industry.
just like it's an extension on your Chrome browser or something. You just plug it in.
Yeah,
Oh, now
pretty much.
we got sustainable food. Like what
That's
more
what
do you
they're
need,
thinking
buddy?
about. That's what they're thinking about it that
Yeah.
way. Bunch of
By
vampires.
2023, the vertical farming market was already worth over $5 billion, seemingly with every venture capital firm around the world with fear of missing out, looking to invest in the next big vertical farming unicorn. This story actually goes back further than you might think. Vertical farms have been popular since the mid-1990s. In 2020, there were only about 100 well-funded vertical farming companies, but fast forward to 2023, and there were over 2,000 of them in the US alone, and many more
Keep in mind,
Europe,
he's using.
Asia, and the Middle East. Some of these companies
Sorry, I thought that occurred to me. He's using the framing of the important framing of whether the company is funded or not, whether it's profitable. So
Another good point.
he goes into it, but basically they're failing because this is not an enterprise that actually produces a surplus as far as resources or measured in dollars.
Right.
And so like it just needs well funded, like a nonprofit, it needs funding continuously because it doesn't generate all its own revenue, even though it'd be great if it could.
It would be great if it could. And I think part of the strategy of marketing this is, clean and organic, is that you can then charge a higher premium in the produce aisle for it. But that's
also where it fails.
Yeah.
Because I'm not paying $10 for a head of lettuce.
Right. Yeah. Right. Absolutely true. And I don't think anyone else is, especially with food prices going up in general.
He gets into that. It's not long, but okay, let's talk.
All right. Yeah. Let's keep going.
were on a rocket ship ride to reaching unicorn status, which is basically a private company startup that's worth over $1 billion. For example, the German company Infarm, founded in 2013, was the first unicorn vertical farming startup, raising over $600 million and reaching a valuation of over $1 billion in 2021. Bowery Farming was the second unicorn, worth around $2.3 billion in 2021. There was real buzz in the air, and the excitement was palpable. People actually thought that Silicon Valley might have finally solved the farming sustainability problem. The benefits of vertical farming were widely publicized. Better crop yields, for example, where vertical farms could produce multiple times higher output than regular farms or even greenhouse farming. Another big key point was the reduction in water use, up to 90% or more. And this is really, really important because depending on where you're trying,
which ecologically is good, you definitely are having a smaller, footprint if you're using less water. But also, water is one of the cheapest commodities out there, cheapest utilities out there. So,
and if you need 100 times more plastic,
that too,
then it's not.
times
It
more
could
glass
be not quite evening out.
Right. Absolutely true.
to build this farm, water might become increasingly scarce. And of course, there was year-round production, where it didn't really matter what season it was or what the weather was like outside. You could grow your crops all the time. Another big thing was land use reduction, using up just a fraction of the land, and by building upward, you could have similar outputs on much less land. This really mattered because this allowed you to grow food in more densely populated urban areas as opposed to from halfway around the world. It also actually minimized the use of pesticides because you can control the environment, and it was indoors. You wouldn't have as much bugs and bacteria.
As you mentioned.
And finally, vertical farms had the potential, at least, to be highly automated. By the way, have you ever wondered how we do our research for our videos? Just put up on
Uses
Google,
ground
right?
news.
Wrong. Our news is broken because when researching a recent left-leaning superpowers to cut through the news/2bit, and you'll get 30% off there. Unfortunately, is starting to sink in. In 2023, impatient investors started dropping out of the market. And we'll get to why they did in a minute. Venture capital investment fell from $2.1 billion in the first 3 quarters of 2022 to just $275 million in the same period in 2023, a drop of almost 90%. But why does that matter? I mean, in most industries, yes, less investment means things will take longer, there's less growth, but it doesn't mean that companies will just come crashing down. However, that's precisely what's happening with the vertical farming industry. Fifth Season, a robo-farming company, was among the first to go belly up in late 2022. Here's how the former VP at Fifth Season, Chris Cerveni, explains what happened to the company.
They spent too much on their sign there on the office. Yeah. This is a very expensive looking sign.
Yeah, that's a man who looks like, he knows the earth and its ways.
He knows robots, because the robots only have to know the earth. The robots will know. They will inherit the earth.
Well, yeah, there you go. I guess that's it.
Valley, and they had expectations of how fast things were going to come out. Everybody was pulling back, so the funding was not readily available. Also, the burn in vertical farming is very high. But that was only the beginning. All major players were failing. In March 2023, Upward Farms, which had raised almost $150 million and had broken ground on a new 250,000 square foot vertical farm in Pennsylvania in 2022, announced it would cease all vertical farming operations. Also, New Jersey's Arrow Farms, Kentucky's App Harvest, and Planted Detroit all filed for bankruptcy. InFarm, the German unicorn, also closed operations in Denmark, the UK, France, the Netherlands, Germany, completely exiting the European market. Calera, the company with
Despite being
the
a
most
German
vertical
company. It's like it's
where's their
reverse
efficiency?
colonial.
Come on.
Where's there? It's like no, it's not. It's colonial. I mean, it's a type of colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
farms around the world also filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in April. And one of the biggest of all, Bowery Farms, took a heavy blow to its valuation. While they didn't file for...
See, and perhaps these are stock photos of vertical farms, but if it's the actual farms that we're looking at,
they look stock.
They're fully, well, I mean, yeah, they could be stock. But I'm assuming that they were at least, if they've been going at least a few years, then they're fully operational. And if they're still not turning a profit after that point, and the only reason they keep on going is investment, I mean, eventually you run into the same problem that like Uber and the other sort of corner cutting.
I don't think you appreciate the power of this fully operational vertical farm. Vertical farm.
My farm is complete.
You don't see a lot of farming and stuff. Well, no, you do. You do see farming sometimes, but there's a lot of people in that in that galaxy.
Right? Yeah.
Real, the
probably
food fucking
trillions. Where does that food come from? I guess the food planet. It all comes from.
Yeah,
one
there's a
place.
few good food planets. And
But yeah.
how does the Empire get the food? Like they strip mine everything else. Are they strip mining planets, the food planets, with over exploitation of soil?
Could be. I remember on Andor, basically what they did was they just fed the prisoners nutritional goo. So
that's a prison.
Yeah.
On Ferrix, you do see. I mean, you have it's an industrial base, but you also have a whole valley of fields. So they actually do show like that. That's where the food comes from.
Okay, I see.
But they just fly over it a few times. So
very clever.
Bankruptcy, the company that was valued at $2.3 billion in 2021 was written down to just under $350 million by the end of 2023 and had to do 2 massive layoffs to stay afloat. That really sucks. This is a technology that I was really rooting for. But to better understand why this is happening, we should probably learn a little bit more about vertical farming.
Even in 2010, so I was in architecture school.
Yeah.
2011 mostly. Even then, I kind of understood that vertical farming was sort of either a panacea or just not workable. And it wasn't even the technical specs or the numbers that I was looking at. There was a little bit of that information, but not a lot. But it was just looking at the designs from the thesis class where they were doing as their thesis project a vertical farm in New York City. And they were basically like just a few layers, and it was like basically 3 fields stacked on top of each other. And I'm like, I just don't see how this is green, sustainable, resilient, or whatever the hell. It's a cool concept to have the supermarket on the first floor, and then all the food that like stocks it is being grown above it. It's cool, but is it workable in reality? And I literally, from the model, I'm like, I'm not seeing it, because I wasn't even thinking of using lights, right, to grow the food. But I'm just like,
yeah.
But because of the floor plates, sunlight can't hit all the floor.
Right.
So I'm thinking, like, I wasn't even thinking of lights. Once you, like, that goes in the mix, I'm like, but then you're burning energy when a field wouldn't.
Right.
So, like, how is this better? And you have all of the material, like, and this is like what everything being framed in architecture, with the embodied energy of the material.
Absolutely.
And they were using, like, it looked like a concrete structure. I'm like, how much fucking energy is in that?
How long is that building gonna last? Yeah.
And let's see, Low Tech Magazine did the full like analysis of like, in order to grow like a square yard of wheat, you basically need like, kilojoule of energy or something. It's completely unworkable. Follows like the energy you need, or and you'll see a bit of that here. He'll end with his big surprise is basically the only vegetable that could ever actually turn a profit is lettuce. The only workable crop for the vertical farming, all these companies, you may notice,
do focus on lettuce, yeah.
You may notice that all those fucking rows, it's just lettuce.
Yeah.
It's the only thing that works.
Because you got like a 20-30 day turnaround or something like that.
Yeah, and it doesn't need minimal inputs, and
right.
And it can be
fussy. You can grow right in the water. Yeah. Well, I mean, with those vertical, like those skyscraper farms too, like most skyscrapers are not engineered to have an inch or 2 of water put across every floor periodically. So irrigation alone, the extra load bearing that you're going to need.
Yeah, if it's a field, but obviously these companies are dealing with like stacks of racks, basically.
Even still, water is heavy, and you're talking about skyscraper heights and stuff like that.
Nah. No, the only vertical farm I am cool with is basically like having a stack of a 3-floor building where the one side, the south-facing side of the building is 20 feet of greenhouse. That's three floors worth.
Yeah.
But true, the engineering on the 3rd floor will maybe need to be severe, but I mean, it's no different than having like a green roof, but repeating it. But I'm talking about greenhouses here, is not like a full deck, I guess.
Sure.
Growing plants in a sealed skyscraper or building instead of a field. That's the essence of vertical farming. In vertical farming, crops grow vertically in stacked trays or containers, maximizing the use of surface area. Plants don't need soil. They get their nutrients from a special water solution delivered directly to the roots by hydroponics or aeroponics. But the key is lighting. We replace regular sunlight with special LED lights that mimic the natural light spectrum plants need to grow. Lighting in vertical farms takes advantage of a certain principle that plants don't actually use all the light from the sun. It's only special wavelengths. So vertical farms use special LEDs that produce light in 2 colors that plants love. Blue LEDs provide blue light that help plants grow, while red LEDs promote flowering and fruiting. By adjusting the amount of red and blue light, farmers can optimize plant growth depending on the crop. That's why whenever you see a picture of a vertical farm, they always look sort of purple, combination of both. Finally, vertical farms also closely...
I can't help but feel bad for the people that have to stare at those lights every day. Because, like, I have a grow light like that. And just having one on in your room, it messes with your vision. Like, it's not cool only seeing blue and red light.
Maybe you get them goggles that, like...
Yeah, just color correcting goggles or something like that. Like, ugh.
Giving me a headache just looking at this.
Yeah, me too.
Monitor and control temperature, humidity, and air circulation.
He's doing the thing where he's making it sound cool, like he's giving the pitch.
Right.
But he's just explaining how it's supposed to work, or at least what these companies are doing, which makes it all the more fascinating that they're just completely failing. Completely. Right. So all this work and effort and technology, it all comes to nothing.
Yeah,
it's real. The primitivists may have a point here. Kind of conclusion.
No, I'm interested to see where he thinks that they have failed. Whether it's like a marketing thing, tech bros don't really know business thing. He kind of hits thing or what it is. But I also want to mention too this tray that he's pulling up here. That's a thick slab of styrofoam. So that's not lasting forever. And that's not super eco-friendly to manufacture.
And wouldn't some of that leach onto the plants?
I would think so. Pretty much any plastic is going to leach some sort of chemical through its life cycle. So, yeah. So they're they're in plastic bins, floating in styrofoam trays. I don't know.
What the fuck, man?
It seems like a chemical soup, for all of their greenwashing that they do for it. Not great.
Create the perfect environment for each crop, regardless of season or what's happening outside. After looking at the technology and comparing it to normal agriculture, I noticed...
Oh, you know what? Something else is sticking to my brain, too. He says plants don't need soil. And while that is technically true on a certain level... there are very few.
The same way they don't need the full spectrum sunlight.
Right.
Even though that's how they've evolved.
Right.
But I guess since we isolated what they really use or they use the most, and so they've optimized that you don't actually need the free source of sunlight because it's not all around all the time.
Right.
But then you can replace it.
Yeah. But I mean, it's also worth noting that most plant species have some sort of symbiotic relationship with fungi, and they're not going to have that if you just have,
unless they include the fungi or something.
Maybe, I don't know, but does that fungi have other stuff in the soil that it needs to live?
And because they're using these optimized nutrient mixtures, they're not dealing with the complexities of compost and all the ways the compost works as fertilizer and promotes plant growth.
Well, that's the other thing, is where are they getting these nutrients from? Is this just another way to turn petrochemicals into food?
Yeah, it must come from somewhere, right? Does it come from moss that they grow, and then you need a factory for the moss?
They're raiding
it becomes an endless Rube Goldberg machine of parts, which does increase GDP. you know. But GDP is simply a matter of measuring the number of transactions,
Right.
which doesn't mean shit
Right.
as far as human flourishing.
Yeah. It basically measures how well the best of, or the best off of society is doing anyway.
Yeah, or the amount of money
lot,
moving
but it does
around,
not.
because the more money that moves around, the better they do.
Better the
or at least-
economy, in theory,
as a-
for everyone,
yes.
although it never is for everyone. So
well, particularly for the financiers, the
right.
ones moving the money.
Right.
Those billions of dollars
Several
going to this shit.
clear cons. You need a lot more high-tech equipment and sensors, which are just more expensive up front. It seems kind of silly to buy high-tech LEDs in red and blue to mimic sunlight when we could just use the sun for free.
Right.
And operating a vertical farm also requires much more skilled workers with knowledge of plant science, engineering, and controlled environment agriculture. Not only are these skills harder to find, but they also lead to much higher labor costs compared to hiring some field hands to work a farm. And after a bit of digging, I also discovered that vertical farms are much more prone to certain risks like pest and disease, since both the water and the air are circulated in a closed loop system.
You
So the
pre-watching
very
son of a
benefit
bitch.
that they were trying to go for,
Or you just read an article or two.
No,
right?
I was like him. I was pretty enamored with this when it first came out. I was like, wow, this could be the wave of the future. Think of all the possibilities. We wouldn't have to till up the wilderness, on and on and on. And I quickly discovered that, I don't think I'd want to run my whole operation hoping that it doesn't get a whitefly infestation. I mean, I love houseplants. I probably have close to 100 houseplants. If we get a infestation of something, that's it for that plant usually. I mean, we can use neem oil or other stuff, but there's not much keeping it in check. We've introduced beneficial insects, and it needs they need a certain baseline habitat to continue to survive, and they're not providing that in these places. They've gone the opposite way to make it a sterile environment.
I guess I was a hater before it was cool.
Yeah, I mean, I got turned off.
In 2010, it was still It was still much speculation about it.
Sure.
But even knowing about how greenwashing was working then, it's like, this is just more of it.
Yeah.
It's trying to make a technological shortcut, a profitable one, to just what needs to be done ecologically.
Yeah.
I
I very quickly moved towards more like integrated systems, like aquaponics, using the fish and the plants together.
Right.
There's a pretty cool operation in Milwaukee. Man, I can't even remember what its name is now, but they have done a lot better with like using sunlight in greenhouses and using compost to heat the greenhouses, because that's another thing they're not factoring in, is you got to heat these things year round. But they use compost to heat things. It's a pretty efficient way to do it. They have other animals. They got their worm farm to break down compost from local restaurants and stuff like that. Like, they've thought of a lot of systems to integrate into it. But even they still use a lot of pumps, a lot of plastic. I believe they are profitable, but at the same, I mean, in terms of they
what are you describing?
Take in more revenue than they
sorry,
have.
I'm sorry, I blanked out. What were you describing?
Why can't Growing Power? That's the name of it. It's in Milwaukee. It's a 3-acre site. This former basketball player took his fortune basically and put it into this operation.
An urban farm.
It's an urban farm. Their big selling points are like, we're on 3 acres, but we produce 1 million pounds of food a year for much lower energy inputs than comparable agriculture.
Right. Because they're doing everything you need to do.
Yeah, they're doing a lot more. They're a lot further down the path of actual sustainable vertical farms. Now, I mean, they could be using, direct pumping, like windmills that they could pump the water instead of electronics. They could be using wood or stainless steel or some other things that last.
There's
longer.
actually this. You can use air pressure as a pump.
Sure.
Like I was looking at
these.
Like,
I've seen like the ram horn
these
pumps
ways
before.
Yeah, the ram horn pump.
Yeah, those are pretty cool. But that could be turned by a windmill instead of hooking up to the energy grid. So So there's a lot they could do, but that's probably the most successful version of this I've found, and it's a lot. It's a lot more low tech than all these tech bro farms, I have to say. But it produces. It does produce. So.
All right, let's act here.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Controlling the environment can very quickly turn on you as well. Also, have you noticed that practically all the stuff that comes out of a vertical farm is lettuce, basil, and other leafy greens? How on earth are we going to feed the world with nothing but green salad? Where are the fruits and vegetables at? Well, that has...
Where are the grains at? And that's something that none of these vertical farms can replicate. Because, I mean, unless you're growing rice, none of the grains really grow in a flooded field.
Agroforestry planners are kind of looking at like nuts to kind of replace, to use nut flour
for sure
for grains. It's a lot of nuts, of course, but if we bring back the chestnut in Gooden Forest, which is the plan.
You can use acorns too, as long as you leach out the tannins. And that was a big source of food for a lot of Native American tribes. But yeah, chestnut would be huge if we could bring that back in forest. Once called the redwoods of the East. They dominate forest canopies.
We mentioned it
for sure.
It's to do with vertical farms' biggest Achilles heel.
Cost.
Let's use vertical farming's most beloved and popular crop as an example: lettuce. This table shows an average yield of lettuce in different types of farms. You can see that the vertical farms have much higher productivity than traditional farming. A small container vertical farm can yield 14 pounds of lettuce per square foot, as much as 33 times more than the industrial open field farming and over 20 times more than a hydroponic greenhouse.
But again, these statistics, I'm assuming...
He's getting there, Zach. Okay. He's getting there. Come on.
I keep getting ahead of him. But I assume this is for a temperate climate, so I wonder what it would be like if you can actually grow like winter lettuce or other crops in the off season. But we'll see.
This doesn't just work with lettuce. It happens with most other crops you can
That's
grow
what the
in a
hydroponic
farm. So,
in the middle
yes, vertical farms
that's a hydroponic greenhouse. That's what, like, okay, cool, that's fine. But it's like it's only 50% more.
Yeah, for a lot more infrastructure per square foot. Yep.
Way more productive than normal farms per square acre. But that doesn't make them profitable. There's more to the equation than just growing more lettuce per acre of land. What if you have no shortage of land? That doesn't really matter, right? It comes down to the price.
And in the market, right, production is not what matters. It's what you sell something for in the market.
Yeah, it has to have a use value as well.
It's not the use. Yeah, well, the use value and the exchange value.
Right.
This is Marx 101, people.
Right.
Exchange value, use value. Yeah. Now, yes, we all have a use value for lettuce, probably an infinite amount, or at least on by person basis, my use value is $3 per week. I wouldn't pay more than that, and that's the amount of lettuce I use in a week, maybe. Yeah. But I could make more salads, but I mostly use it on sandwiches and whatnot. But anyway, what was I good? But yeah, but then the exchange value, and that's where it's not. But that's what profitability comes in. All right.
Absolutely.
No one's paying more for the same lettuce grown in a vertical farm. And this is where it gets complicated, because vertical farms have costs that traditional farms don't. How about electricity? Running all those LED lights and robots 24/7? So that's going to eat into your profit. Well, here's what I found for a full year of vertical farming. Notice that contrary to what I initially thought, electricity doesn't make up most of the cost. It's less than 10% of the total cost of a head of lettuce. The highest cost comes from labor, which, as I mentioned before, is more expensive than a normal farm. And in this case, contributes almost half of the overall cost. The second highest expense is capital expenses. This comes from high initial investment in everything from equipment, sensors, heat pumps, AC, heating, cooling, and the like. And then there's the maintenance of all that equipment.
Value comes from
and
labor.
That works out to a cost of $5.26 per pound of lettuce, or about $4 per head. And that's the...
Nobody's paying that. I'm sorry.
And that's before you factor in the cut that the supermarket.
True.
takes,
Yeah.
right?
So that's not even the wholesale price.
And the distributor and the distributors. Yeah. So that's what will make it $10 because you notice it's only 60 cents per head, and that becomes $3 by the time it's on the shelf.
Right.
And $2.50 if it's on sale, which is when I get it.
Just want to say hi to James in the chat. He brings up a good point that he doesn't even like lettuce, and I'm sure that is the case for
then basil.
a lot of
You're
American
gonna live on
families.
basil.
Yeah.
You're gonna eat the bugs and basil. The bugs and basil. Hope you like your bugs well seasoned.
They're actually not that bad. I don't mind bugs.
The price at the
Neither one,
farm.
but-
Imagine what you might end up paying at the supermarket. Take a minute to think about how much you paid for your last head of lettuce. Let me know in the
Wasn't that
comments
much.
below. This will depend on where you live, obviously, but I'm guessing it's less than $5.25. How about in a traditional open field farm? Here's what the cost would look like. The numbers speak for themselves. Producing a pound of lettuce on a field costs 6 times less than a vertical farm. Yes, you can argue that there are higher shipping costs because farms are further away from the people that need them. But these supply chains are super optimized and add very little to the actual end price of lettuce. Vertical farms' problem isn't that we're using LEDs instead of free sunlight. It's that labor and capital costs are way too high. In farms, you don't even have to worry about how much your land losing value will cost you every year because it
What if
doesn't lose
farm
value.
workers were paid more than scrap wages, though? There's a reason that minimum wage laws don't apply to farm workers.
Seasonal agricultural.
I know in New York it was kind of a fight to get them up to, I think, the kind of a sub minimum, which was like 7, because it was like $3.50 at first, or maybe this is the tip wages, which will always be like half minimum.
Mhm.
Now that minimum is 15, at least upstate. Actually, I forgot what the outcome of that was, but I know there was progress made in New York on farm wages. It was, I think, it should have been a bigger deal, but it was because it was one of the thing that, like, farm owners were like, we will all go out of business if we have to pay the farm workers proper wages or give them or you know what, maybe, oh no, I don't think it was actually wages that were improved. It was the fact that they were required to give them bathroom breaks and proper, like, lunch breaks, something like that.
Let's see.
Something really, really fucking basic, like not surf rights, Or,
So Liberty Twitcher says, where do minimum wage laws not apply to farm workers? What states? That would be all the states. You can pay farm workers by the amount picked. So by the bushel, by the basket, by whatever it is. And if that does not line up to $5 an hour, that doesn't line up to $5 an hour. Or to 7 or
13.
13 or whatever it is. So yeah, that would be everywhere, as far as I know. But thanks for the question. Appreciate it. So what is, okay, so you're saying it's not true in California. What is the rule in California? What can you point us to tell us about minimum wage for farm workers?
I guess we could go do a research stream.
Yeah, I cannot shift or else it's going to mess up the stream
okay.
view, but if you want to.
New York,
put it in the chat here.
Workers, min wage. Let's go do a search. Let's see. Okay, Farm Laborers Wage Board. This is Department of Labor. So the official rules here. Let's see. Under the Farm Laborers Fair Labor Practices Act of 2019, so maybe that's the year I remember this happening, farm laborers became entitled to overtime premium pay starting on January 1st, 2020 for any work they perform in excess of 60 hours. So, okay, they got overtime work. I think that was the improvement. As required by the Act, the Labor Commissioner convened a wage board comprised of the members listed below. Per the statute, the wage board is tasked with considering recommendations, blah, blah. So this is more on there. Okay. Finalizes farm overtime regulations. Okay, so the latest is that they got overtime pay.
Okay.
That was the improvement made in 2019. All right, let's go back to the search results. Minimum wage order for farm workers, including occupations in agriculture, particularly hazardous for employment of children below age 16. Wage, okay. Maybe this is just for youth, though? Basis of wage payment. Payment of the minimum wage provided by the order shall be required for each week of work. Usually there's some kind of... Oh, here, let's see. Basic minimum hourly wages means in New York City for large employers of 11 or more. 2018 it became 15. Small employers 15. Okay, so it became minimum wage, normal minimum wage in New York, which is 15. Fight for 51, but then inflation started. Yeah, and well, it's mentioning agriculture here.
Okay.
So maybe it isn't. I think it used to be like tip wages, and I think we have. I don't think we've done. Oh, let's see, wage orders. Here we go. Hospitality and no farm workers. Let's see. The minimum wage order for farm workers applies only to farm workers employed on farms where the total cash remuneration paid all persons employed on the farm exceeds $3,000 in the previous calendar year. Minimum wage order for farm workers provides that all workers, with certain exceptions, receive the minimum wage as indicated in the chart above. Let's click that link. So is this what I was looking at? Yes, it was. Okay. All right. I think I reached a conclusion there.
Okay. So in the state of New York, it does apply to agricultural workers?
Yeah, the official minimum wages.
Okay. Well,
and in 2019, what was legalized was their overtime pay.
I see.
Which they never had.
There
was no overtime. Because, okay. I mean, imagine you're working a 12-hour day and getting no overtime.
So, okay, I can't find anything real quickly about California, and, I'm not going to claim to be an expert about them, but let's assume you're right, and you have to pay at least minimum wage. So it's still much lower labor cost than what we're talking about with vertical farms.
Right.
And I think that's the point. Is that
it's minimum versus... It's minimum versus...
So-called higher skilled workers.
Yes. Well, people with degrees, and that means they have college debt, which they need to pay off. So they're going to demand high salaries.
I mean, he put the tables up, the labor costs per acre or whatever. So
yeah,
very, very low per acre on conventional agriculture, very, very high per acre on these vertical farms. So I think that was the point. So thanks for bringing that up. Appreciate that. And of course, this is all in theory too. We know that agriculture industry is notorious for paying less than minimum wage to undocumented workers, people in bad situations, so on and so forth. But for the purposes of argument, because that's hard to get a good hold on, we'll say, yeah, even if it's minimum wage, far lower labor costs for conventional agriculture.
I'm sure there are some good articles and sources for that.
But continuing on with this video.
In a vertical farm, not only do you have to spend hundreds, sometimes millions of dollars to set up a vertical farm, but that farm loses value over time as your assets and equipment depreciate. And if you're wondering, what does a head of lettuce or a pound of lettuce cost here in the US? About $2.60. And that's to the consumer, which means that the wholesale price that the farmers are selling it at is $63 to $1.26 per pound. And that's why these farms just cannot compete, especially if where they're established have high labor costs, easy access to normal farm produce, and high electricity prices, which describes a lot of the European markets that this was targeted for. Ultimately, the entire industry was predicated on a bet that vertical farms established right near customers with higher levels of sustainability and better water management, which is all true, could produce a product that was cheaper than a developing nation with copious amounts of sunshine and rain normally, and the cost of shipping it. And that gamble just didn't pay off. But there is a silver lining. Most large vertical farming companies are relocating in hot and arid climates where there's a lot of renewable energy, like in the Middle East. This is what's making huge construction projects like Saudi Arabia's line possible. How else do you feed millions of people in a...
When did this
Have you
come
heard the
out?
latest about the line?
I was going to say, originally it was supposed to be, 1,800 miles, and now it's, or kilometers, and now it's going to be 1.8 something. It's a fraction of the
kilometer.
scale. 1.8 kilometers is the new.
In 2 years, it's going to be half a kilometer.
Nice.
There's no way it's going to be that long.
Nice.
It's just going to be like, a resort colony
right.
project.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a vanity ego project to begin with. They just wanted to say, we have the world's most technologically advanced.
So he definitely
linear
ends on a
city.
sour, like, what an asshole kind of note. Going like, well, the good news is they're moving to the Middle East where they can then basically get chic money.
Yeah.
The next crop of invest with people with way too much money,
Right.
to invest in things.
Yeah, even though, I mean, large-scale permaculture practitioners have proven time and again that the easiest way to grow more food in arid climates is to slightly change the topography so that seeds collect, water collects and is stored in the soil instead of evaporating or running off. Very cheap ways of manipulating the microbiome. So.
Oh, you know what? We could this could be a next week thing, but I watched a really interesting video about the Great Green Wall in the Sahel, and so that was kind of I don't think that was too long.
Great Green Wall.
Anyway.
In the Sahel. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it's basically the Sahel. You know what the Sahel is? The Sahel is the
it's
area
like a steppe
between
region around the Sahara, right?
the Sahara and the Sahara and the Savannah.
Okay.
In West Africa. So it's kind of a temperate zone, but it's basically drying out because the Sahara is growing, and but this can be either reversed or they can be blocked if you actually plant and replant and get better water management in these areas around the Niger River Valley and all that, and it's working in small bits, but it's one of those things where it's a large international effort because it's UN grants and stuff like that. And I feel like the billions of dollars should go there so they can actually grow food. And it's actually like part of it is starting farms back again in Gabon because all of the youth have to basically travel to Spain to work as migrant labor in agriculture there. But they'd be just happy enough if they didn't have to do that and just grow food or work farms in their home country.
Yeah.
And it starts with basically digging these half moon
I've seen
rain
those.
rain sheds, basically.
Yeah, and that's mostly what it takes is just in permaculture it's what
Controlling the water.
capture, sink, and store basically is the way that it goes with the water. So it filters out slowly over the course of the season.
Okay.
Not all at once. So
Last minute.
yeah, I guess I'll wrap up with some thoughts at the end then.
linear city. Also, while many companies are going under, the vertical farming industry at large is actually still growing with a compound annual growth rate of about 25%. If we figure out how to further automate these farms and the hardware and prices
more
go down as
technology.
economies of scale are reached,
Come on.
could we actually see this work? And the answer is kind of maybe. Ultimately, this is still a wager between humans and engineering versus Mother Nature and the sun. And where you fall kind of depends upon your outlook. But if you thought this was interesting,
Whether
you're
or
not gonna
not
believe this video, gotta watch
your
it.
belief system is based in fantasy or reality.
No way. So I guess my big final thought about all this is if profitability is the major sticking point for these sorts of farms, why do they have to be done in a profitable in a setting where they need to be profitable, why couldn't they instead be
Because
a community sort of thing
Mhm.
where we're not worrying about labor, we just grow it all for our own
well, there we
use?
well, yes, that. Sorry, go on.
That's most of the thought, basically. If it's not
Yeah, and thus the
profitable,
thought
why not apply it
continues
to that?
where if the biggest cost is labor, then it becomes the issue is not the engineering, it's not even the energy. I mean, it factors in, but it's the organization of labor. And of course, the tech bros fantasy is that they'll eliminate it. That's how they will make it work.
Yeah, it's more automation,
Eliminate
like you
the
said.
labor with robots.
Right.
But the robot one failed the hardest by the sounds of it. So go fuck yourself. But yeah, they could have vertical farm. None of these are nonprofits, and because of, I guess, the high capital costs, they're not going to. We do more of less. Doing agroforestry has smaller capital takes smaller capital investment, which also means you don't need to rely on the finance sector, or at least not, in a big way. Yeah. And speaking of doing more or less, as this is my platform for library board, library things. There's no particularly long video, except for an hour-long lecture on how to start one.
Okay.
Which I'll do, look at in my own time.
Yeah.
But here's some bits.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited for this. So, Library of Things, aka Library Socialism. Ooh.
Library of Things is a space where you come and borrow useful things.
Okay.
You won't
Well,
find
oddly
many
enough,
books.
when you look up Library of Things, there's basically this and like 4 other short 2-minute news clip videos like this. And then guess what the 6th video is? Anduism's Library Socialism.
Ah, okay. Man, he covers all the good topics.
So it's a very short pipeline.
Nice. That's not too bad. I kind of like it that way. All right. Yeah, let's get into it.
Books in this library in West Norwood. It's full of things like DIY equipment, electronics and camping gear, all available to hire at incredibly low prices.
We are still learning and improving our stock list. But we went with what are the kinds of things that are really useful, but that clog up our cupboards or are expensive to buy.
The concept is simple enough. Anyone can join for free, browse the online catalogue and borrow up to 5 items a week.
I just bought a house and it needs a lot doing, and I've needed lots of tools and things, and it's great that I could just come here and get something because I don't have the time nor money to go and get small pieces of equipment.
It's been open for a month now and already has a star item, the carpet cleaner.
I think it's most popular because it costs £150, £200 to buy, costs a lot to hire, and from us you can borrow it for 3 days for £9.
The majority of the stock was donated by the local B&Q, other things from members of the public.
Tell me how it works.
Yeah.
Wait,
This
pounds?
new
Pounds
social
of what? Speak English. Sorry, I don't know why. I was like, you know what? That's a joke I've never made. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Let's go for it.
Prize is all part of a growing trend for a sharing economy, accessing products and services
The real one.
rather than buying them.
It has environmental benefits, using less resources, it's saving you money. It also means that you're not cluttering up your space with stuff you don't need, so there's convenience, but also it's creating trust and connections in a community that otherwise wouldn't have happened.
And it's the community element Bex and Sophia
You mean they
are
actually
so
bring it
keen to
back?
uphold.
What?
They plan to host workshops run by local people to teach the skills needed to use the items they're lending out.
It's coming along. Should we sign you up? Yes, please.
And they hope that in the future,
That's the
people
kind of
from
mission
other parts
creep
of
that's
London
like, well,
will
if we
be
do
signing
this,
up to
then we
create
also
their
need to do
own
that.
library of things. Alice Solfield,
Make it work
BBC
better.
London News.
Now, one of the things that kind of comes up with whether it's Food Not Bombs or free stores or any kind of like trash or, recycling, reusing stuff is that there's like it's basically the end, or it's continuing a pipeline which still starts with middle class people buying stuff at Walmart or the mall. And it's like, in order to have this reuse sharing economy of mutual aid stuff, you still need this bourgeois economy above it. Now, you don't need it, of course, but it's like that's the way it works now. What are the ways we can circumvent that in small ways that like don't involve socializing the whole economy all at once? You know, socializing Walmart or the sweatshops or whatever. And I kind of like the sharing economy is sort of a step towards that, because it is cutting out the middleman of the middle class first buyer, right? Where it's the middle class person buys something, they use it 3 times, and then it goes into their garage forever. And then when the free store is active, they're like, oh, good. And they'll be the first to show up with tons and tons of stuff to donate. But mutual aid should not rely on this stream of donation, right? Because even if it's mutual aid, it's still bottom top down movement of goods.
Yeah,
of goods.
More like charity. Yeah.
A sharing library, especially if it's a community project that they're the ones that are purchasing stuff, to basically completely circulate to everyone, regardless of social or economic class, to use for the item 3 times or whenever they need it. Like what it would be the N64, I guess, for a LAN party. You know, it's like, because why else do I keep my N64? To play it with, like, when the kids are over or something,
right?
Or
that's
if I really
keep mine, yeah,
or play Perfect Dark one more time. But then I'm realizing, like, well, anyway, I'm not really good at this game, or why can I not beat anything on the hard level? It's just like impossible. Or you just have to memorize, do everything so fucking perfectly. But then, of course, you watch a speedrunner do it like perfectly. In 2 minutes, and then I'm like, oh, fuck this.
You're never gonna have that discipline to get to that level. Yeah,
right. It takes me enough discipline to basically like play like a Perfect Dark level, like difficulty, and it takes me like 20 minutes to get for like the level, which on Agent only takes like 3 minutes or something, because I have to go so slowly and so carefully, and or whatever. I don't know. Gamers delight, I guess.
Right.
I think I have another video. What's next?
That's the last in the list as far as I can tell.
Oh yeah. Well, I have the 2 squatter videos.
Oh, okay. The hated subculture of squatters.
Yeah, that one's okay.
And the London anarchist group squatting mansions to fight.
That's a short one too. So
there's
a longer one where it's a full police complex. That was like where they actually jailed terrorism suspects and did waterboarding, and they vacated it, and it's basically empty and following a court injunction or something. So a group of anarchists are basically squatting in it, basically saying like, we want to turn this into some big community thing. I didn't save it, did I?
I don't see what that would be.
I guess not. It was longer, but it was longer and not like a lot of good information. It was more for the coolness of this crew.
Is cool. Like, oh, man.
But but let's go into the informational ones.
All right. Yeah, we can start with the London anarchist group squatting mansions.
If we see a big building that looks expensive,
and it goes to show,
we take it.
Before these start.
Yeah.
These are both in London. And it's because the squatters movement, or at least like a movement of politically motivated squatting, is very much European, and there's non-American. There was something of it during or after Occupy, but that was more about occupying to keep people in their homes.
Yeah, to prevent the
foreclosures. It wasn't to squat and use adverse possession. Right. It just goes to show, based on all the content from the last 2 weeks, that in America is purely a criminal activity, when in England it's something you can politically do.
Act, yeah.
Even though the next video will make an argument that that's what created a backlash against squatting. Because in the 50s, you had a lot of normal people, respectable people doing squatting. But then in the 60s, it became a political hippie thing. And so it made it like marginal. They marginalized doing it, which seems really simplistic. But it is perception and reality, or like that.
All right, let's get into it. All right, 2016.
Rough sleeper. That's right. The term
Rough
instead of homeless,
4100
instead of homeless,
in the
use
UK.
rough sleeper.
Which
that's
that's
something we
that's
could adopt.
Not that many compared to a lot of U.S. cities.
Oh, you think?
Yeah. Like,
Geez, fuck. A city of 200,000 alone would basically have like 4,000 or so.
Yeah, well, I think New York has...
I think we have 200. At peak, we have like 200 or something.
Yeah. New York City probably has at least 10,000, I would bet.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's 15, and maybe it's 20 now.
San Francisco,
you're using the old number.
Comparable to that. And yeah. Wow.
But that's how you get the whole street where it's just like tents along the whole block.
Welcome to our lovely 17 million pound abode.
And now
that is a
anal?
great acronym. I love
they
it.
picked it that way.
Oh, I'm sure they did. That's awesome. You just walk up to people. Do you guys like anal? Oh, that's hilarious.
And it doesn't have English, so we could start a chapter here.
There you go.
So
We can
for
do
the
the
tour,
first chapter.
Let's take you through. This is our screening room. We're gonna have a nice projector up here, do some nice films, documentaries. In the meantime, we might be through that TV, who knows? We've got a fire alarm, which everybody knows to ring when the bailiffs or the police arrive or whatnot. We've opened a good 30, 40 buildings in the past. When you first open it, it's like the adrenaline rush, especially when you've been scouting out a building for ages, a really nice one that you've been wanting, and then you find an entry point, boom, yeah, it's beautiful. We'd been eyeing this building out for a while, and obviously we got evicted from the other one, and we came straight over to this place and got in within a matter of minutes. You could probably fit about 100 people in here easily, safely as well. These are the penthouse suites for the exclusive members of Anal. What is Anal? Well, it stands for the Autonomous Nation of Anarchist Libertarians. And we think it's just a really joke symbolism of how we're taking the piss out of the system, basically. Again, such massive, massive rooms with chandeliers, and we've got lovely views from outside. After the fascist attack in Belgravia, if we want them to know we're here, come back again. We were having workshops on the day, we've got children and families around, and the next thing you know, we've got people screaming that there's somebody trying to break into the building. So we presumed it was private security, like the owner trying to get us out illegally. And then just windows started smashing. Then we learned after looking outside, they had fascist masks on and they were pouring fascist salutes. So yeah, we knew then it was fascist. Then at that moment we're like, right, well then, let's fight back. So we grabbed fire extinguishers. None of us got injured though. Definitely as a squad I've seen, there's a lot more squats popping up. They say that most working class people are just 2 paychecks away from being homeless. It's a housing crisis, isn't it? Society as it is nowadays is generating more and more homeless and more poverty. So is it morally acceptable to have buildings like this empty while people are dying on the streets who needn't be, Actually, I'm lost here. Where am I going? Not through here.
No, what's not great is that he mentions they're basically hopping from squat to squat because they get kicked out basically after so long. So this is the 30th that he's been in. So it's not sustainable. It's a very nomadic life.
Yeah,
so, but
ephemeral.
that's the case. That's the price of being rentless.
I guess so.
But yeah, I don't know how he makes ends meets in other ways, but it's collective, so I'm sure they pull through. But obviously not very marginal on purpose. Not something that's mainstreamable, I suppose. It's but the point is to draw attention to the fact
to
that
the cause, that we have
there.
all these empty buildings. And
for an
people
empty
that need
mansion
them,
tax,
or people that need shelter.
for an empty bedroom tax or empty mansion tax.
Right. Yeah. Land use tax, something like that. Just want to say, James, looks like you're going to eat pepperoni rolls now. Well, thanks for stopping by. I always appreciate it. See you next time.
Gotta get back to his pepperoni rolls.
He loves those pepperoni rolls.
Those pizza rolls.
When it comes to Central, to be fair, there is no group quite like Anal. I've got to be proud to say that, you know, Anal do penetrate deep into the heart of London, yeah.
Oh, this is great.
About 4 years ago or so.
But they're careful. He says they scout for a while, you know, they're looking for entry points. It's work.
Right. Yeah, especially if you're getting kicked out.
Those news clips make it sound so easy, finding the house that's vacant. And it's like they just came in and took what wasn't theirs.
Moving trucks showed up, and then they were moving furniture in there.
Because it's like, it makes me wonder, like, well, how did they know to move in as soon as you left or something?
Right.
Were they home alone like the water bandits?
Yeah.
Watching, canvassing the neighborhood?
Posing as police, just so they can see who's gone. Yeah.
They get down to London, and that's when I'm like introduced to the squatting scene. I think, you know, the more squats you go to, the more squats you help open. Eventually, you know, you become an expert. Then, damn it, page 15. Are we not good enough? Yeah. So, Squatters Eye Up 17 Mill Home is a community hub, and again, it's speaking about how the owner's like a Qatari and ex-general. Anal have been squatting buildings like this for about 3 years or so, and criteria is just any building which looks obviously empty and not used, but also with some degree of wealth. Like, you know, if it's a building which will get media attention, if it's a building which we think has a greater use, then we take it. We think of homeless being people who just sleep on the streets, but there's lots of youth nowadays especially who don't have a home to go to. They just have friends' sofas, but they're still homeless. Even if they have a sofa to sleep on, they're still homeless. But you just don't see it, you know.
And every day you see a different room, every day I've found a different cupboard. Back in 2015, I lost my family, a good life. And drugs was destroying it. I didn't understand what was happening with the drugs. She was taking me on. I ended up cheating on my missus at the time, 6 times later. I went off the rails and came to the streets of London, abandoned my own property. After I moved her away over to a different address, abandoned my property. And this is a workplace. It's no a family home, you know what I mean? But it could be. It could be. It could be, mate. You know? It's just wrong, man. You can, we're all one big family. We're the biggest family ever. And many of us are dying in a year of the cold and having nothing to do and taking drugs and being stuck with nobody. What's my trade and my knowledge? My trade and my knowledge is homeless, mental health, and the alcohol and the drugs issues, yeah? I can help the type of people in an environment like this. Jesus, you can see we're helping people, you know. Some people are getting happier. There's people coming off the streets, they're getting cleaner, they're getting everything they need, and they're getting fed. That's what their aim is today, you know, my aim with me.
If you look at the streets of London now compared to how it was 6 years ago, there are so many homeless now. The problem is getting so much worse. There is hundreds, if not thousands, of buildings just like this one within Central or within, you know, like a 5-10 mile radius that are just left empty, just like this one.
That was pretty cool.
This video is brought to you by Squarespace.
I have people living in my house. I don't know who they are, where they came from. Doors are gone, the kitchen has been gutted, and they won't leave. They won't leave.
The term squatter is a very controversial one. Freeloading criminals who break into people's homes, stealing them and leaving them in terrible conditions. But the history behind this strange subculture is a very unique one, challenging many moral and cultural attitudes.
This is still from an English point of view here.
Used for home. In today's video, we will explore the hated world of squatters.
No longer will there be the so-called squatters' rights.
Occupy everywhere!
First, the extraordinary standoff between a homeowner and a squatter. It's Julie's house, it's in her name, and she pays the mortgage. But for more than 2 years, Teresa Smith has been living there, slowly destroying it.
Now, growing up in the UK, I seem to constantly recall hearing stories of squatters. Like every other week, there'd be some news article about how squatters broke into someone's holiday home, which would then be followed by these lengthy court battles where they tried to evict them out of the property. And it seemed as if the law was on the side of the squatters as opposed to the property owners. And in some cases, actually granting the property to the squatter. So if you're sat there wondering who came up with this genius law, well, this is all due to a thing known as squatters' rights, which the UK law states that a long-term squatter can become the registered owner of a property or land they've occupied.
But in 2 minutes, he kind of goes to new content.
We can look at it again.
Without the owner's permission. Now, squatters exist all around the world, but I'm going to make
history.
Focus on the UK, where if you were to ask Joe Average from the pub what his mental image of a squatter is, he's probably going to tell you something like a long-haired hippie with dreadlocks who reads The Guardian, hasn't taken a shower in months, uses copious drugs, refuses to work, and hates polite society. And look, that stereotype definitely carries some truth to it, but is really only the surface level of the squatting culture.
This is only one of many ex-army camps taken over by the thousands of ordinary, hard-working folk who haven't a place they can call their own.
And it all starts in medieval England. In a time where British nobles would be fighting over various massive plots of land, it became pretty tricky to keep on top of the paperwork, like which British noble owns what bit of land. And because these plots of lands were so big, there would be certain areas that would be known as common land. This was land that was kind of left for the common folk. Like, they didn't have direct ownership of the land, but they were allowed to use it. But you see, this presented a problem. All right, so let's put it like this. Imagine you're a family that has been on a plot of land for about 3 or 4 generations. And then one day you wake up to a knock on the door to find some great-great-great-great-grandson of a British noble wiggling some papers in your face saying that one of his great ancestors owned this land once upon a time. He then proceeds to tell your whole community to get off this property now, and you don't really have a legal leg to stand on. And so squatters' rights started with the intention of trying to stop this situation.
Trespassing? We, the common people, trespassing on common land which we own?
But then as time passed in the 16th and 17th century, movements such as the Levellers would come along with more of a political ideology. You see, these were squatters who believed that every human has a right to land.
The earth, sirs, was made to be a common treasury for all.
Unsurprisingly, this wasn't a popular belief in the feudal system, and so very quickly laws were passed to try and undo some of the squatters' rights. However, squatting in this era was a very small issue. It wasn't really causing much of a nuisance. But then everything would change after World War II. As 3.5 million female-deprived men returned from war to their lovely ladies, this would spark what would be known as the baby boom. With no new houses being built during the war and tons of buildings being demolished because of the war, Britain was like a busy dinner party with not enough chairs. And so Britain was in a housing crisis. In the 1945 election, this was the hot-button issue of the time.
So, if it's houses you're after...
Every single political party had promised to build new houses. But would you believe it, these politicians didn't keep their promises.
I don't promise them tomorrow. No one can do that.
However, there was a small silver lining. Now that the war was over, there was many derelict buildings left. Things such as ex-military bases. And so, out of necessity, a huge squatting movement started, involving ex-military men and their families.
This is only one of many ex-army camps taken over by the thousands of ordinary, hard-working folk who haven't a place they can call their own.
These families would occupy these derelict buildings in a kind of legal grey area, staying there all the way up until the mid-1950s. It was estimated across Britain there was 45,000 squatters. And like, what they were doing technically wasn't legal, but none of the political parties wanted to be known as the party that evicted war heroes onto the street. And so many of these squatting camps actually received funding from the government, with the left seeing it as a case for public housing, and the right seeing it as a batten down the hatches, take matters into your own hands kind of attitude. Squatters in this era were well received by the press and publicly celebrated as an expression of English patriotism.
At the other end of the scale, hundreds of homeless London families
Isn't that kind of
take
wild?
matters into their own.
That the conservatives were like, oh yeah, these squatters are go-getters. They're taking initiative.
Right.
And I guess that's only because they were doing it on public land or something.
Yeah,
Like,
that could be.
there was no
That's
property
the
rights
difference.
being
Yeah,
infringed,
right.
or
It's
it's
not
the state's
the
property.
private. It's
So
being raided.
as long as you squat on private land, maybe you can kind of politically get away with it, but you need to be deserving. You know,
Of course,
it's
they always love a good deserving poor story too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Hands and a new squatters invasion.
When in reality, it was just people trying not to live on the streets. But then the goodwill towards squatters would change very quickly. Before we crack on with this video, I want to give a shout out to Squarespace for sponsoring. Squarespace is the #1 platform for building and developing your own website. These days, having a website is...
You just get the Squarespace app, but he kind of jumps to like hippie movements. So he kind of he frames it almost like a cultural change, but he did give the fact that the squatters kind of stopped, the squatting of the war families, the veterans, stopped in the mid-50s because that's how long it would take before new mass housing was built that could accommodate the population, especially those with jobs. And they were, but a lot of it was council housing of the brutalist and other modern style variety. A good amount of it was demolished in the 80s by the Thatcher regime. But it was council housing is public housing, by the way. Council meaning built by the local council. Council being local government. And yeah, I mean, essentially, council housing was built in full by the mid-50s, so they didn't need to squat anymore, which is, of course, what the real policy we advocate for is, and the real solution. So it became a political act for the marginalized, by the marginalized, or at least by the middle class, but for the marginalized. So it wasn't so much like there was squatting was like got goodwill because it was the right people, and there literally was no other housing. Now there is enough, but not actually for everybody. Not for those that don't deserve it in the capitalist economy.
Customize them to perfectly fit your brand and what it is you do, and as well tons of built-in tools like e-commerce, email, actually very fun to use. So be sure to check
Squatting in luxury flats and
www.squarespace.com/Jimmy the Giant, and to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain,
turns the spotlight on a still desperate housing situation.
On the 8th of September 1946 in central London. By now, the communists had tied themselves heavily into the world of squatting, despite the fact that the squatters weren't really supporters of communism. But regardless, these communist radicals had created a plan called the Great Sunday Squat, whereby the Communist Party moved over 100 families into luxury apartments in central London. You see, these apartments were used as offices during the wartime, and rather controversially were just given to Conservative MPs who were allowed to keep them for themselves, where the argument was they were supposed to or could have been used for public housing. The government was now under pressure. They feared a spread of further rebellious squatters, and so they arrested 5 leaders of the Communist Party. They arrested them under the offence of conspiracy to trespass.
Now meet the man with a few words to say and the police who took him along for a quiet talk.
The Great Sunday Squat completely changed the British public's attitude towards squatting. It was seen as countercultural and an active rebellion against the state.
They thought they could snub the conventions of decent society when they seized the 60-room mansion and transformed it into a hippie house.
Toward the end of the 60s and into the 70s, a brand new...
Yeah, I mean, he says it was 46, but maybe it was 56?
Yeah.
Or 66? Like, the images he's showing don't look like 46.
No, that looks at least beatnik culture, if not getting into the hippies. Yeah.
I have to look up this Great Sunday Squat.
Sure.
Maybe there's more to the story.
Squatting would begin with the hippie movement. These large
Jimmy the
squats
Giant.
were opened specifically to get media attention. With a mansion on 144 Piccadilly in central London, the Il Pie Island Hotel, the Centre Point Building, and Freestonia. A new radicalist wave of squatters had formed, who were actually creating a rift between the original squatters, who were mainly families trying to just get some housing, whereby now these radicalist squatters weren't ex-military families. They were more so young single people, and were all pretty much self-proclaimed hippie dropouts.
The public has sympathy for the genuine homeless, but not for the scoundrels and hellraisers who infiltrated number 144.
They have sympathy for the genuine homeless, but not enough
changes.
to actually provide them with housing.
Right. we feel really bad for you, deserving poor, but you're not really that deserving.
Yeah.
So,
and that's where, the radicals like us are like, well, public opinion can be its own thing, but they aren't going. We're not going to tie what we're doing to public opinion.
Right.
I mean, if we did that, then nothing would ever change.
Right. We cannot just toe the line of politics of respectability.
Even in here's a good example. I was just giving it as it's cultural, not like political power, but I was using it as in the context of arguing Green Party shifting things to the left if it was more supported. In my book, I just finished reading about the 90s. It's a pop culture book, so it's very mainstream in its construction. But he mentions as one of the things when talking about language and PC culture in the 90s, he covers Queer Nation, where it was 91, 92, an outgrowth from ACT UP, where the radical gays who were dying in a plague. Queer Nation published Queers Read This, and it was basically a kind of, not the first, of course. There was the Scum Manifesto earlier on. But actually, no, it was the queer version of that, which is heteros should just die, queers forever. Queer power means fuck you, hetero, means fuck you, and we're queer, and they created the chant, we're here, we're queer, get used to it, which is, of course, we don't care about your feelings,
right?
We're a fact,
yeah.
You have to deal with it, and using queer, which was a pejorative, and it's why you had the more sensibles being like, no, we're gay, we're happy, we're gay, use gay. And now, like, hopefully the only people left now who use gay and describe themselves as a gay man are the normie gays that hate queers, hate trans, and are basically the side of conservatives on a lot of stuff.
Right.
Because they're normie capitalist types, but the thing is, the radicalism of Queer Nation certainly created a lot of backlash, right? In the 90s, but by the end of the 90s, queer is used as much as gay, and when it came to media that was pushing or exploring things beyond just normativity and gays wanting to be normal, Queer as Folk,
yep,
Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. It's not gay. It's
one,
not gay eye for the straight guy.
It's
Queer Eye. Because queer is also kind of a fun word with Q and all that, but it means more. It's more inclusive.
It is more inclusive. Yes,
it expands what it could be. So and it goes to show that it's like the nonprofits and the normative queers, where like they created the alphabet soup of LGBT, and then they were forced to add Q and A and A and then the rest. They didn't want to. They just wanted to keep it as LGB or something, or LG, or just gay straight alliance. I mean, when I was in high school, it was gay straight alliance.
Yeah.
It was just gay, and there's obviously more than that. But the rest were ignored or still marginal. But you could be gay and out, but that was like step one, right? Getting that kind of acceptance. So at the time, that's the progress is sort of it's mean and it's unfair to say this marginalized group, you kind of have to wait your turn, because there's these other marginalized groups where like once they're accepted, then you'll be able to be accepted, but you can't be accepted now because you're just that far out away from normal. But the positive is that because of this push of radical queerness, this moved the needle. By the aughts, queer was just as used as much as gay, and now it created the fight for gay marriage.
Yeah,
and it's called gay marriage, not queer marriage, because queer marriage is basically no marriage at all. Which is where we're at now as far as what's the up and coming counterculture.
Right.
Now queer is the main counterculture, where before it was kind of a fight over gay versus queer. But now queer is the counterculture, and that's sort of why it's painful now, but to all those trans people, in another 15 years, you're going to be pretty normal, and then there'll be another marginalized group that will be the common culture. Like, it's not going to be you anymore, which is going to be great. It's going to be great, but it's not a matter of patience. It's a matter of like, we got to keep doing what we're doing.
Pushing for it. Yes. Oh, that's an important point. It is an active
we can't
thing.
be. Yeah, it's an active process.
Yeah,
which is isn't a bad thing. It just means it is a thing, and that's the thing to accept. That it's not preordained, but it's also not unlikely.
Yeah,
it's actually the likely thing to happen if you get those pushes from stuff like Queer Nation, which it's just some oddball pamphlet in New York City. How could this change the cultural landscape? But it did.
Yeah, it did.
And in certain media, trans media and whatever, because it's doing the same thing. If there's a backlash, right? And it seems like the walls are caving in with attacks on with what Republicans are doing. But even as they started doing it 3 years ago, and it's like the world's, it feels like to the trans people that I know, it's like the world's ending. Like they use the word genocide, right? It's like the end of all existence. It's a backlash, but it's a minority. It's not even popular. It's not catching on. In 5 years, it's going to play out, and it's going to be either overturned if we push. And I'm with them on that. I'm telling them not to give up or not to
I agree.
Fall into a reactionary mode, because I kind of see this like the defensive mode versus an offensive mode. So I think that's what I'm advocating for here, because you have this kind of like that normative gays had. They've always had a defensive mode of we have to defend ourselves because in a hostile world, because in the 80s, it was so normal to be homophobic. It was the normal thing, no question. And in the 90s, you still had jokes and sitcoms and stuff about like, oh, I'm being people think I'm gay, my life is over.
2000s, yeah, for sure.
But then after gay marriage, it all just dissolves away like it was barely there. And now, we can't write this anymore.
Yeah.
Couldn't write that today. Because things changed.
But also you do still. I mean, it's such a baseless argument. I hate that stuff. But I mean, it does go to show that the people in leftist spaces who just spend endless time hand-wringing about optics and messaging and if this is the right way to present things, in the long run, you get what you fight for. You don't get, it doesn't matter. They will always try to use your terminology against you. They will always try to co-opt. The right continuously co-opts the left's sayings and phrases and terminology. That part doesn't really matter.
Yeah. It's got to be slow. And this is where you get into the Gramscian way of thinking, where the culture changes before the material circumstances. The culture, the language of using queer, making queer normal. And then that 15 years on, that makes queer behavior able to be in public, transitioning, which would have been like made you a freak is now like, well, now you have to, there will be certain populations that don't consider you to be a freak. Obviously there are those that still do, but they're in another 10 years, they're going to be the marginal ones.
Right.
Being in a huff all the time because their behaviors around queerness is now going to be the abnormal thing. And it's already becoming that. And that's sort of why they're all pissy all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah,
they were proven wrong. Like you don't hardly ever hear.
Another example is, you can think that BLM and 2020 completely failed to change policy.
Right.
And that's true. But, and also since the 90s as well, it sort of became okay to be anti-cop. And after 2020, now it's okay to be anti-policing.
Yeah. And
I think that's the cultural change I'm talking about, is just being okay to even have a position, which means now an organizer can go out and organize people based on that line.
Yeah.
Where before it was impossible.
Right. The Overton window has been moved.
It's been moved. Now it needs to be made political, right? Which requires political organization. And it's not the Democrats, or Democrat organizers are not, or a Democratic candidate is not organizing for this. So, so it's up to the independent organizations, which people need to believe in and support. So that's quite a sidetrack from this, but it's since this video is about why the squatter subculture being hated, and the videos we've been covering have shown, at least as far as mainstream news, it's still very much hated. We've been also talking about how, like, it's not really something that we care to normalize. It's not like being queer. It's not it's interesting, the Supreme Court, like, arguing about it being a condition, or no, like it being a class of people being homeless, and a status. That's right, status. We don't want to normalize the status of being homeless, or the status of being a squatter, right? No. We want to make people owners. We want people to be stakeholders, right. And so it's different from the identity stuff.
Right. Because they should always be transitional.
But I guess what we're really aiming at here is to normalize the position to consider property to be something that's a common good, public good thing, and not to decommodify it. And squatter movements hated in their being marginalized, is because it's still outside the Overton window to think like this way about property. So we kind of need to tease out what would it take, what kind of halfway steps to get there, in the same way where the halfway step to being anti-police is art that depicts and gets popular and is about being anti-cop. The example in the 90s book was Ice-T's Cop Killer.
Oh, yeah.
Which was produced during the LA riots or right after it, where it got popular because of them. And it's funny that Ice-T is like, more actor, but he is a and he started on a freaking cop show for
oh, that's right,
20 years. But he got famous because of it's all called Cop Killer. It's so funny.
It's a complex guy, that Ice-T.
He is a complex guy.
Also been in thrash metal bands since the beginning too.
Right, yeah, I was a star.
Weird dude, but interesting nonetheless.
Yeah.
All right, let's finish this one off. I think this is gonna be the last one we have time for today.
Yeah.
The cause of the real homeless and doing them a disservice.
They also didn't believe that squatters should try and seek to make agreements with local councils. They believe that the squatting association should be able to seize the property and actually become the landlord, which surprisingly people weren't a fan of. Not only was there a change in attitude amongst squatters, but in 1977 there was a change in the law which actually empowered the squatters. Section 6 of the Criminal Law Act of 1977 was created to stop landlords from evicting tenants unfairly onto the street by making it an offence for the landlord to break.
Keep in mind, he's the one using the image of the
dirty hippie.
White,
yes,
the white dreads guy.
Right, you're right. Yeah. Not a completely charitable description of the problem, but
instead they would need to go to court and make a case to get them out. However, this created a legal loophole, and you would start to see squatters actually putting Section 6 notices on the front of the house that they occupy. And you might be there wondering, why couldn't police just come in and evict them for trespassing? Well, you see, in the UK, trespass is a civil offence and not a criminal one. In order for police to be able to evict squatters, you would need to take them to a court to get permission from a judge to get the police to kick them out. And this process
basically how they've been describing it in the US as well. It is a civil matter, which it should be. Like, we're not talking about breaking and entering or burgling. We're talking about entering an unused vacant property. And
it's because a property it's static, it's not going anywhere. Right. You can't pick it up and move it. Technically can if you have a big enough truck, I guess.
Yeah, but
the big infrastructure.
it seems pretty reasonable to have the standard for what is a crime be something that's committed against at least another person or the public at large or something. So that would not fall under the...
Well, you mentioned another person, but if there is an owner that is in the picture, then they are being harmed, financially speaking.
Kind of, maybe.
So they are
sometimes.
That's why they're getting hit with a burglary charge or a trespass at least.
Yeah.
But it is odd that like they're considered a tenant even if there is no prior agreement or anything like that. Though I would think of them as such, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't believe in landlords, so.
Yeah. Me.
Same way I don't believe in
take
queens.
months and cost tons of money. Meanwhile, you got a bunch of squatters shooting up drugs in your house and destroying the place. And so this legal loophole became known as squatters' rights. Squatters were now protected by the law.
What they lack in...
No, they have some protection by the law.
Yeah.
There's still a legal procedure to get them out of your place. Like, it's acting like he puts the shield behind it as though like some superhero has descended and said this is now under control.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't Mr. Nuance.
Right.
We're using him as a example.
I know. It's just funny.
No.
Grey matter between the ears, they make up for in colour on top.
Throughout the 80s into the 90s and 2000s, many notable
That's all
squatters
about
moved
punks.
up. And the public sentiment towards squatters was now very much against them. Constant stories of people's homes being ruined by squatters, who were known for using drugs, having loud parties, requiring endless legal battles to try and evict them out of the property. And what's even more shocking is there would be cases of people actually losing their homes to squatters legally, whereby somehow in British law, if you've spent 10 to 12 years squatting a property, you now had a legal case for ownership of that property. This is the country I live in. By the late 2000s, the public sentiment was growing so much against squatting that someone would need to...
Like, these guys never considered what the alternative would be if there was no procedure for taking over abandoned properties. Like, is that okay to just have forever these properties that may or may not have an actual legitimate owner, but because we can't track them down, like there has to be some way to free up property that's not being used eventually. Like,
does there be, Zach?
I mean, otherwise everything falls into some absentee landlord's hands eventually, and then like they collect it all.
Leave it to the market, Zach.
If
the land is valuable, then obviously somebody will step up to profit from it.
To come along and do something. In steps Mike Weatherly.
I think there are two types of squatters. Some who just like anarchists who don't care about other people's property, and I think those should be held to account.
A British Conservative MP for Hove in East Sussex. Mike made it his
Reword
life's
that.
mission
They
to
don't
get
care
rid of
about
squatters'
property.
rights. And so around the early 2010s,
No.
a war had started between the MPs and squatters. There was a fierce battle and protesters were going after Mike, but squatters were really going against the tide. No one was on the side of squatters. And so eventually in September 2012, a law was passed making it illegal to squat in residential properties. In that same year, Alex Hay became the first ever convicted squatter, facing 12 weeks in prison. It was finally over. The plague of squatters were done. But you see, something is missing from this story. The image that was being portrayed of squatters was that of a criminal freeloader. But was that entirely true? Mike Weatherly himself recognised that there are two types of squatters.
There are some who just like anarchists who don't care about other people's property.
Where he would make the distinction between the anarchist freeloading type,
And there are others that are in need, and we should absolutely get behind them and help them in their plight.
but then also people driven into squatting via poverty. And there
But on
certainly
our
is a moral
terms.
argument to be made whether it's right to have buildings unoccupied for many years at a time when there's people who are living on the streets who could be living in them. As it stands right now, Section 6, otherwise known as squatters' rights, still applies to commercial properties, which I think there is more of an argument for. If you have an office block that hasn't been used for 7 or 8 years, I don't really think it's a bad thing that homeless people can go and live in there.
She could look through the window and all her mother's possessions were being ripped up and her embroidery thrown around and everything was being destroyed and they couldn't do anything about it.
Oh, it's always a helpless little old lady that they put up as this hypothetical victim.
Must happen every day, Zach.
Yeah.
It's gotta happen.
gotta
Just
happen
like
'cause
all
they're saying
those, just like all those girls who are losing to trans women.
Oh right, yeah. This epidemic of things that happen like one time.
Did you see the there was actually a meta study put out that showed that there's actually no competitive advantage for trans women. They actually lose more. Like they don't actually win at any higher rate.
Especially when they're on hormone replacement therapy, that destroys whatever biological edge they may have had. And
It's just common sense, Zach.
so many things
It's
are
just
common sense, but don't hold up to much scrutiny.
I keep trying to look for a good like quip of like turning common sense around, but like the thing about common sense is that it's common, or I get something that isn't quite punchy.
Yeah. I know what you mean, though.
Something that just says common sense just means stupid.
Common sense just means feels, basically.
Yeah, feels. Yeah, not like established knowledge over generations.
Right.
Because that knowledge was just somebody's feels at one point.
Right.
Some bias or assumption that's made that it was never based on anything except some kind of like, well, this is like that. So.
Yep, it's gotta be.
Women
And they broke down in tears in front of me and said, this cannot be right. And it took them, I think, 10 weeks and £13,000 to get their property back.
But the thing that I and the rest of the British public hated was the idea of going into residential property. It was very wrong, and it's very good that that is now over. But I think it is very important not to stereotype a squatter and just see them as drug-taking hippies, and understand that there are many other circumstances that might lead someone
Even
to
though
be
I just
a
did
squatter.
that.
I'd be very curious to hear you guys'
5 times
thoughts
during
on
this
squatting,
video.
whether you think it's right or wrong. So comment below, leave a like on this video, and subscribe to the channel.
Engage.
Yeah,
Well, guess
right.
what?
These little
Jack,
throwaway lines at the end. Come on, man.
Besides watching it, we're not engaging beyond that.
Yeah, no, that's it. Interesting though that I had not heard that history of the UK squatting movement and how it came out of World War II. That was pretty cool.
That's why I saved this one.
Yeah, definitely. That was good knowledge to have.
Because there were, again, I put in like anarchist squatters, and I didn't get that many videos.
It's funny.
But I more keywords could be helpful. I only
Maybe.
put in 3. I put in squatter, like anarchist squatters' rights, or anarchist squats, political squats.
Sure.
I got some things, but not a lot. I expect a lot more actually, but I didn't dig too.
Right. I'm still surprised there has not been more people covering this subject.
I've been pretty distracted, writing all this and whatever. Yep, the week continues, but got a rally tomorrow, and I'm going to do my office is going to do a tour of here in Albany. We have one of the last remaining World War II destroyers.
Oh yeah,
as a tourist attraction of sorts. And so we're going to do the full tour, which I think as a kid, I don't think we did it. Maybe I did an hour tour. I don't remember being on it that long as a kid. But it was in the, it must have been the late 90s that it's called the Slater. That's one of the last escort destroyers that are, you feel like there should be hundreds of ship museums, World War II or otherwise. Right. But I guess so many of them were recycled or scrapped. Only a few were just kept around. Sad.
Very sad.
Sad.
Memorabilia destroyed.
Do you think he's it's unlikely he'll be actually jailed, but he's being threatened with it. But do you think Trump is going to make it through this trial?
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
I
didn't even know it was going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, this was not the most major one. So, like, I think even if he does end up paying more fines, he's going to tie it up.
It's just time he's not spent campaigning, but being a media star, he doesn't really need a campaign. But that's the,
I mean,
his greatest advantage. He doesn't actually need a campaign, and he doesn't really.
Right.
Does he? Did he ever have canvassers? Were there canvassers for Trump?
I've never heard of them or seen them if they were.
Organizing, get out the vote for Trump.
His shtick, though.
Sort of why he lost in 2020. You know, I was re-listening to an episode called "I Rant for the Green Party." I was particularly annoyed and upset after Bernie pulled out of the race, and all the Bernie-crats were sad boys at the time, and maybe stayed that way for at least a few years. And and I was basically like, I was pretty upset. So with the Dems and all that, so I was just like, Biden's gonna lose. So I was in anger. I was very wrong about that, but because I was 8% confident that like Biden was on track to lose in 2020.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone really predicted it that well.
But that was just me like being like, Biden is what nobody really wants.
Yeah.
But he did win because people just didn't want Trump more.
Right.
It was purely
it was
negative.
A vote against Trump rather than a vote for him.
It was a purely negative election. So now that he's the incumbent, people need to vote for him because of him.
That's true.
Not because they don't want Trump. But they're trying to make the case they're trying to repeat it, of course, but that's the problem with political cycles is you really can't repeat the same thing twice. They keep thinking they do because paychecks, but they just cannot repeat everything over and over. They just can't. We can't either. So even though it feels like we do, but that's because like we never win or lose, you know, we're just existing. So it seems like we do the same thing until it works. Since the situation keeps changing, we're kind of working based on the assumption that it's just we need the right situation.
Right.
Because it's always a moving target. You know, we could keep changing what we're doing based on the situation, but the situation changes so rapidly. It's like we don't have the organizational capacity to do that, actually. Not when it takes us a whole month to change our website because we don't have staff to do that,
right?
To stay on that shit. Because it was just this week, State Green Party finally made a page with all the resources for petitioning. We didn't have that before. We should have had it 4 weeks ago, even before petitioning started. But now we have it for the second half. I guess we have 2.5 weeks left, actually. 2, 3, maybe 3. But I can't wait actually for June. But we got the big Tulip Fest this week. That's the largest, is a big event in the region. And yeah, so I'm not really looking forward to it. But since we'll petition Saturday and not Sunday, Sunday can be my happy, chill day. Last weekend, I actually didn't do any petitioning. I kind of ducked out and enjoyed myself, I guess. But I was also just actually, isolated. Yeah, isolated myself. All right, it's 10 o'clock. Thanks for another great week.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our two hour stream is kind of enough.
A lot of fun.
If we do it every week.
A lot of good stuff we covered. Yeah, and that's okay. If you're feeling overwhelmed or we just haven't scraped together enough material, that's okay to go back to every other week if you need to. But
there's still another 3. You've seen how long the playlist is, right? There's still another 15 videos we can do. So
okay.
And I can always pull more material, but there's still a lot of stuff I picked. There's still things I pick and we never got to, or I didn't think it was important enough at the time.
Sure.
But that's because we were going every third week. So, all right, cool. Good luck. Good night. And good luck.
Good luck with your election as well. I hope everything turns out for you. Don't let those big guys get you down.
Those real professionals.
Yeah.
All right.
Have a good one.
Bye.
All right, and that's going to do it for me tonight as well. I thank everyone who joined and commented. Appreciate your comments as always. And look forward to seeing you guys next time. Will be Sunday. We'll be doing more Legend of Zelda, Tears of the Kingdom, and just talking about whatever's on my mind at the time. We'll see how it goes. All right, have a good one, everybody.